Bleeding control. First aid from ReadySF. The first step in treating a wound is to stop the bleeding. For almost all wounds, you'll be able to control the bleeding with direct pressure and elevation. To go hands-free, you may apply a temporary pressure dressing to keep direct pressure on the wound without having to hold pressure yourself. A few types of major wounds may call for a tourniquet to stop the bleeding. Let's talk more about each of these methods for bleeding control now. To control bleeding of any wound, first apply direct pressure. Place the cleanest material available over the wound and apply direct pressure with gloved hands. This might be clean gauze or paper towels or even clothing. If blood seeps through the material, add more cloth or gauze on top and apply more pressure. Do not remove the first layer of gauze until after the bleeding is under control. You may have to continue putting pressure on the wound for a long time. Don't let up until the bleeding is under control. This may be anywhere between 3 to 10 whole minutes. A pressure dressing allows you to go hands-free while continuing to control the bleeding. They sell commercial pressure dressings, which you may stock in your first aid kit, or you can create a pressure dressing by applying gauzy material over the wound and wrapping it tightly in place with athletic wrap. A pressure dressing is not a bandage and shouldn't be left on the wound long term. It's a temporary placeholder that allows you to maintain pressure to work to control bleeding while you use your hands to continue the rest of your patient assessment. If you don't have the ability to make a pressure dressing, you can simply continue to apply direct pressure by hand to stop the bleeding. For major life-threatening bleeding, like wounds from blast injuries or chainsaw injuries, you may need a tourniquet to control the bleed. These situations are not common, but to apply a commercial tourniquet, position it above the wound and tighten it until the bleeding stops. Application of a tourniquet cuts off circulation to the limb and is an emergency that requires immediate attention from EMS. Note the time the tourniquet was applied and call 911. What about instances of bleeding that won't stop, or major bleeding to areas where tourniquets are not applicable? Continue to apply more direct pressure and elevation until the bleeding is under control. If you're unable to stop the bleeding, call 911 and maintain direct pressure until EMS arrives. Remember, pressure applied directly to the wound can successfully control bleeding even on severe arterial bleeds. Consider this trainer's expert bleeding control for a hockey player with a jugular laceration. She quickly recognizes a life-threatening bleed, applies direct pressure to the patient's neck, and then they're able to skate off the ice together and get to the emergency room for surgery.
A big hit at center ice, and I was kind of following that. And then I just kind of looked a little bit to the left and I saw some blood.
Rachel Leahy is an athletic trainer for West Point Army Hockey. Most of her days are spent in a training room working on athletes. But last Thursday was like none other for the Dutchess County native. During a game against Sacred Heart, Army's Eric Huss suffered a serious cut to his neck after being caught by an inadvertent skate. Leahy, who was on the bench, jumped into action when she saw the player in distress.
I obviously couldn't tell all of the structures that were damaged, but you could tell it was very severe, and that was kind of all I needed to know.
Leahy rushed Huss off the ice while controlling the bleeding. He underwent surgery at a local hospital later and was released the next day. Her fast action prevented a potential life-threatening situation.
I'm not gonna lie, for a few seconds there, like I thought we might lose her. When all of us were kind of in shock, it was chaos. There was one person that was like a calming influence, and that was Rachel.
That's what we're trained to do. That's what we're educated on is, don't panic, take a breath yourself, go into it with a clear mind and then do what you're trying to do.
That's it for bleeding control. Next up, wound care. Thanks.